hours of hours.
Speakers today. Today we have Kate Murray. Kate Murray is a digital projects coordinator at the Library of Congress, where she leads the federal agency's digital guidelines initiative, audiovisual working group, and the sustainability of digital formats website. Kate is a member of the MENA, YASA, on which she's a technical committee member, Simply, and several secretaries. The speaker today is Morel. Morel is the video-led supervisor at the National Audiovisual Conservation Centre in Metadata. He has worked at various digitisation labs, preserving analog and digital audiovisual materials, and is a member of the FADGI's audiovisual working group. So, a little introduction for today's presentation. The US Federal Agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative, FADGI Audiovisual Working Group, has started a new project to explore the potential digital preservation benefits of adopting Coalition for Content, Provenance and Authenticity, C2PA, and to provide guidance about not just its use in broadcast wave files, but expanding the guidelines for embedding metadata, but also to trace the origin of different types of media, including data created or impacted by artificial intelligence. Thank you very much. I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Andy. I should shorten my bio to just say I'm Kate Murray. I'm proud to work at the Library of Congress, and I read standards, so you don't have to. But so thanks for coming to our talk today. We're going to talk about an ongoing effort that's led by FADGI, which is the U.S. Federal Agency's Digital Guidelines Initiative. And I have FADGI swag, but if you want FADGI swag, I'm all out of pins. But we're going to talk today. This project is led by FADGI and the Library of Congress to explore content authenticity and provenance for digital audiovisual content, especially a project called C2PA, or the Coalition for Content Authenticity and Provenance. One of the key drivers of this is the increasing impact of AI, artificial intelligence, in creating and interacting with content. So we're looking at ways to document these intersections as part of a responsible AI initiative. This is all a very moving target. Specification development is happening right now in real time. So there's an opportunity for the digital preservation and cultural heritage communities to impact the standard and set the expectations. We have the ear of the C2PA community, so let's take advantage of it. There are a lot of moving parts with this work. So our goal today is to give you some of the highlights and encourage community engagement and awareness. A quick overview of what content authenticity and provenance information is and why it's important as more content is impacted by AI. And I'll say right off the bat that AI is here right now, right? It's impacting your life, and if it hasn't already, it will impact your collections. FADGI is neutral about the use of AI. I mean, we have thoughts and feelings, but not officially, right? We're neutral about it. We don't have a stand if it's good or bad, because it is reality. But if AI is interacting with your collections as either a creator or a consumer collector of content, we want to document it. The what, the why, the when, and even the what, the how, the when, and even the why, to maintain the transparency and trustworthiness of digital heritage content. Here are some short definitions about the overarching concepts, neither of which are new to digital preservation and cultural heritage communities, of course. But what is new is how easy it is for AI to make changes at even the smallest level. So content authenticity means that verifying digital content is genuine and unaltered. It does not mean that the content is factually correct. Provenance is the verifiable history of content that shows its origin and any modification it has undergone, including signal chain documentation. A bit of a vocabulary review here. C2PA means the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, and it's the open technical standard setting body, while content credentials is actually the cryptographically signed data that implements the C2PA standards to provide verifiable information about a document's contents, origin, and editing history. Essentially, C2PA creates the rules in the framework, and content credentials are the product that follows those rules. These terms are often used interchangeably, especially by Kate Murray. So when I say C2PA, I sometimes mean content credentials, but it's all essentially the same kind of thing. Briefly, C2PA is a standard that defines a set of metadata that contains details about the provenance of digital information, including, for example, images, video, sound, or text data as both standalone files and embedded within files. C2PA documents changes to and within a file, similar to what can be accomplished at some level with a whole file or intra-file hash value or checksum, but it takes it much further, with documentation about the specifics of how the data was created from the outset, as well as if the data was inserted, deleted, changed across the lifespan of the file, including if that data was created or altered by AI. C2PA is a very complicated organism, but the spec describes the technical aspects of the C2PA architecture. It's a model for storing and accessing cryptographically verifiable information whose trustworthiness can be assessed based on a defined trust model. The C2PA spec defines how to create and process a C2PA manifest and its components, including the use of digital signature technology, which enables tamper evidence as well as establishing trust. The full spec is open, public and open at the C2PA websites, and it's also fast-tracked to be an ISO standard, which is a really hard thing to do. I'm on the specification, the ISO TC171 SC2 WG13 that is working on this spec, which is how I have the ear of the C2PA community at the moment. There has been some delays with the ISO process, but not the spec itself, but it is shortly will become an ISO standard. A new version of the specification was published in May 2025, right in the middle of our work, and some of the accompanying explanatory documents are still catching up to this new version 2.2. There's also a GitHub repo to track issues. I should say, I should have said this earlier, but we do have a slide at the end with all of our references, and we're also happy to share this presentation, so don't worry so much about trying to get those URLs. But all of this to say is that there is very strong interest in architecture to support C2PA, and it continues to grow. If you go to the C2PA website right now, you'll see the list of participants, and it's Google, it's Meta, it's Sony, it's huge names here, which is why we're having some interest in it. So we'll talk a little bit about the manifest that defines the content credentials, can include various assertions, that's a key word, which I'll talk about in a minute, assertions about the content, including the ingredients, the date, the time, the location, and the device that created the content. The metadata manifest that holds all of this information can be embedded into the file, and it can be published as either a sidecar or both, so there's flexibility for implementation depending on your workflows. I'm assuming somebody's going to give me the hook if I'm talking too long. So, a really strong draw for many people is the relationship of C2PA to the use of responsible AI. C2PA can document AI content or changes down to the pixel or the video slice or the audio sample to provide a clear record of content creation and history. I'm quoting here from a document on the C2PA website called Guidance for Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning, which says that the C2PA framework can be used in artificial intelligence and machine learning systems to indicate tampering of data sets, software, models, which are utilized during training and inference. There's also a structure called the AI ML training dataset content credential that not only establishes the credential of the overall training dataset, but also provides transparency for how the dataset was used in an AI training process. So while not infallible, C2PA is one tool that can support responsible AI. But of course, there are risks here, and it's still very early days. I'm here to stress that we are exploring this as FADGI, but the Library of Congress or FADGI has not made a firm commitment to use C2PA implementation. Data hacking is possible for one. Also, our friends at the Human Rights Organization Witness published a really great blog post discussing the fact that there's a significant portion of online content that will always exist without traceable provenance. So what might that mean over time? And there are also reports that C2PA data may not carry over when when migrating to a new format or it can be changed. So there's a lot of hype around C2PA at the moment, and you'll see it everywhere if you haven't already. But what will sustained implementation look like? It's kind of hard to tell. But there's enough happening right now to warrant investigation of the digital preservation community. So here on slide 10, I'm finally going to get to our project. Right. So earlier this year, FADGI started a project to explore adding C2PA manifest data to our popular embedded guidelines for embedding metadata in broadcast WAV files. And I naively thought, we'll add it to the guidance, we'll get support in BWF meta edit, and voila, we'll be done. I've changed my tune a bit as we dug into this more deeply. So C2PA the C2PA standard has a way, a very high level way to embed data in a variety of formats, including RIF and WAV files through a custom C2PA chunk, but there is still much to define. Most of the C2PA standards and options are focused on still image and textual documents. Support for AV formats is very much forming. There is a C2PA audio task force that we've interacted with, and the video work is also growing. But how to do something is very different than why you should do something. And so that's what we are starting to explore. Back in December 2024, the Internal Library of Congress AI Working Group had a briefing about the potential for C2PA across several workflows. This evolved into a community briefing in January for about 80 of our closest friends from nearby government agencies, including the National Archives, the U.S. National Archives, Government Publications Office, the National Library of Medicine, and Smithsonian, as well as other GLAM, galleries, libraries, archives, museums, community members. We had enough momentum there to establish an ongoing group with quarterly meetings, with the first one in March, and we've had 3 so far, and we have several subgroups running. Our main goal for this group is to build awareness for C2PA in the G+LAM community, to create a community of practice, to build user stories outside of records management, and return feedback and user stories to C2PA to augment their existing collection. And our community notes are available at that link.
Okay, so FADGI took the initiative to come up with some user stories to describe incorporating C2PA into audio digitization preservation processes. And this example is part of a suite of user stories that represent fitting C2PA into digital preservation workflows. Talks about an audio technician wanting to embed C2PA metadata within the custom chunk of a WAV file coming from a 1/4-inch magnetic tape. The user story describes embedding the C2PA manifest into the RIF compatible file, and the manifest is contained in its own self-identified chunk. The chunk is placed at the end of the RIF chunk to maximize compatibility with other embedded metadata or potentially migration. So if anybody's interested in playing around with the implementation, public test files are available on the C2PA GitHub repo. Unfortunately, the repo does not currently contain any audio test files. The FADGI is looking into creating and providing them. That's something that's coming into the future, but this is sort of the status of C2PA's test files currently, and they are publicly available.
So let's talk a little bit about another aspect that we are exploring, which is action assertions. In brief, an action assertion is a metadata field that describes actions to a file, like file creation or opening, edits, and more. It's really what we know as technical metadata. I compare these action assertions in some way to premise events, if that gives you a little bit of context. The C2PA spec has a list of predefined action assertions, as well as allows for custom assertions, but many of these are geared for still image and document content, not so much AV. So here are the ones that we in the AV community, or FADGI, here's where the AV community can contribute to improve the standard. And all of this is a reminder to say this is happening right now in real time, and now is the time to provide feedback because things are in flux and we have the ear of the C2PA community. So the FADGI is looking at the predefined action assertions, and we are creating templates for how these might be interpreted and used in the digital audio community. For example, we propose that most file edits will be summarized in the C2PA.edited field as opposed to spread out across multiple fields. And we're looking at what assertions are missing so we can propose they be added to the spec. Each action assertion can have additional descriptive fields. The description, reason, when, software agent, digital source type, which Morgan will talk about more in a minute, changes and parameters. I've been harping a bit about documenting AI interaction. So how does that all fit? There are a number of ways to record that, especially by use of the digital source type tag. And that can be done again at any level. That can be the system, the file, the frame, the pixel, whatever makes sense for your implementation. And this is again heavily influenced right now by the image text document folks, but the overall structure is there. So this is an example, which you probably can't see very clearly, but that's okay, of what a metadata manifest would look like. So here is an example with several action assertions. And this data would be embedded into the file, or it can be carried as a sidecar. And here is where we are with this action assertions template work at the moment, which, by the way, the C2PA folks were very excited about the concept of these templates that they would model for other communities as well. But there's definitely more work to do, but we're making progress, and we'll keep community informed as we go on. One thing that's really a wonder for me still is, like, how do we handle keeping data in sync? So some of this process history data may also be stored in coding history in a BEX chunk, for example. So do we record it twice? What happens if it gets out of sync? What takes precedence there? We're still exploring and learning. And as a C2PA, when I asked that question, they said, oh, I don't know. Maybe we'll figure that out. So Morgan, take it away for a moment.
Okay, so I'm gonna take a second to talk. Oops, I'm gonna take a second to talk about the controlled vocabulary options for digital source type. So as Kate had mentioned previously, the action assertion description field digital source type is meant to specify how the media item was created. Currently, the term for this field comes from the IPTC, which is the International Press Telecommunications Council vocabulary for digital source type news codes. You can go and look at those, and these terms are focused on contemporary photojournalism use cases, and they are not particularly useful in describing source media types for items in audiovisual archives. Examples of the terms are digitized from transparent negative, virtual event recording, and composite, including generative AI elements, and not really something that we would, use to describe audiovisual objects. So in order for C2PA to be useful in an AV archives context, which we would like it to be if we adopt it, digital source type will need to have terms typically used to describe the kinds of objects that are in our collections, either physical or digital. And one potential option would be to adopt terms from an existing vocabulary, such as PB Core. Instantiation physical is a PB Core element, and it has an associated vocabulary containing a robust list of physical formats typically found in audiovisual archives. In PB Core, this field is used to describe physical objects, and in the context of C2PA, the vocabulary terms would be used to describe the format of the physical source of digitized media. Library of Congress staff have reviewed these vocabulary terms. We find it robust. There are a few terms that can be clarified, updated, added. There's maybe some gaps or some redundancies, but the good news is that a discussion on the terms will be held at the PB Core Advisory Committee meeting at EMEA 2025 in Baltimore. So if any of you plan to be in Baltimore and are interested in this, please come by. We'd love to hear your voice, and that's exciting. So instantiation digital, on the other hand, so that is a term that is used in PB Core to describe the format of a digital object. And this doesn't have a controlled vocabulary. Instead, the PB Core documentation describes that users should use the eon and media types. So not as useful in this case. There are other potential vocabularies, such as the Library of Congress media type schemes and video format terms on our linked data service site. EBU Core's format class and Getty Art and Architecture Thesaurus contains materials by form, facet, but those are all far more limited than the PB Core instantiation physical. So we're kind of moving forward with a recommendation to use the PB Core vocabulary. And just a quick note on just NAVCC's perspective on this is that our Audio Lab staff is currently creating B-Wave preservation files for all digitized content, so they're familiar with the BWF guidelines and implementation. Some of our Audio Lab staff have been involved working with Kate, working with FADGI, and developing a crosswalk, but initially that kind of crosswalk that Kate mentioned, potentially making between C2PA and BWF, that is not actually going to be such a simple task, but that was kind of our introduction into looking into these terms. Also, the Audio Lab unlike the audio lab, the video lab doesn't actually embed any descriptive or administrative metadata into the header of video preservation files. This is part of a larger conversation about the lack of field-wide guidelines in the practice. I know some people are embedding administrative and descriptive metadata into MKV files, into FFP1 MKV files, but there isn't really actually, in my understanding, like a community practice for this. So this kind of gives us a launching point for potentially starting with C2PA and seeing and having some sort of framework for doing that, and then coming up with some sort of community practice. The Video Lab preserves thousands of videotapes and discs from the copyright collection, the Library of Congress's copyright collection, annually, and the provenance of these items actually serves as a legal record. So this could be a potential launching point, and user story use cases for this sort of metadata.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah,
So that was a lot to talk about. I'm gonna start about time. So where are we now? So here is where we are with this current work. Again, we have the C2PA, so we're going to take advantage of that for as long as it lasts. There's a few key things happening here. We have a white paper group that's just starting up about the need for content authenticity and provenance, not just C2PA, with the rise of AI. There's a lot of work that's already existing in our community about this, so we're going to draw from that. But it's really the impact of C2PA that we're going to, the impact of AI that we're going to concentrate on. I did a version of this talk a week or so ago with the EMEA Generative AI group, and they have, I learned a lot. They have a new collective starting that I don't believe YASA has a connection to yet, but we certainly should, and they're calling this Trust in Archives. I think there's going to be more information coming about how YASA members can engage with them. And finally, we have a new effort starting up to define community recommendations for implementing content authenticity and provenance for digital audiovisual collections content. It's going to be inspired by the structure of the NDSA levels of digital preservation tiered approach. And we'll evaluate functional areas from simple to more robust. And the community recommendations will identify a range of needs, tools, workflows appropriate for different use cases and resource levels. And this work will be led by our colleagues Dave Rice and Jerome Martinez, both of who are very well known to YASA and beyond. And here is the reference slide. If you wanted to take a quick picture of that, I'll leave that up for a minute, but that is the end of our talk, and we're happy to take any questions. Sorry, Zoom, I didn't have any hands.
I'm scared it was a room.
Oh, it's the room. Doesn't matter. All right, yeah, it's fine. Okay. Do we have any questions?
You didn't get any.
Good, no questions.
Yeah, thank you very much.
What's the experience with people we talked about? It's they've already
I'll ask them. So we literally just, they're newly on contract for this work that we started last week. Yeah, so it's all, and our kickoff meeting is Tuesday. So, but we'll bring it up, and if there's an opportunity for them to do that, we would like that.
You'll be wearing your lei to the meeting.
No, I'm not going, but yeah, well, thank you for that suggestion.
Yeah, hi. I think so I'm part of the trust team and I'm getting the people to
Oh,
okay.
great, yeah.
So I've seen that there's a lot of and I've seen a lot of the news that there's a lot of manufacturers that are coming. You can see the new Google Pixel and Fortinet. So I'm thinking, but also in themselves with the publishing companies, mostly like YouTube or Netflix or whatever, like they are enforcing or trying to enforce the tools, these materials, they are compliant in order to make their like for their own original solutions, or maybe try to prepare this kind of CTPA or CTPA like embedded materials for publishing. So it's in a way like in some point at some point in time maybe more of this is going to become more normal in you can see on platforms for your
Yeah, so I think what we didn't say in this talk is that it is widely implemented by many different platforms, including Google. The new Pixel 10 phone came out with it. Repeat the question.
So my guess is also is that It's very, that's not easy to end up with platforms like YouTube or like
Oh.
about implementing like importing possibly, not importing, but preparing this type of product for material like CTPAs and that.
So at this point, some platforms do require it. I don't have it in my mind, which is that the ones that they are. And some of the issues around, what will happen if content does not have this data, like Witness brought up, there's very good reasons why you wouldn't want provenance data in something related to human rights, right? Because they track folks down. So I think it's really going to come down to institutional requirements about, what folks want. I will say there's so much hype around C2PA at the moment. Like I didn't know anything about C2PA 18 months ago. And in the last 12 months, it is just absolutely everywhere. Will that wave last? I'm not sure. But I think the content around or the concepts around provenance and authenticity will continue in some way or another, even if it's not fully C2PA. I'm not sure I answered your question, but.
Okay, something maybe you could start with each one, recommendation, and then this will go like to other places, but let's say like commercial, but you can start there because I think like this will make it work.
Yeah.
Or to forward and then go to it.
Yeah, I mean, we're even having, discussions at the Library of Congress about like, what happens when C2PA, when collections with C2PA data come into the library, right? We're not currently requiring any of that, but we do have a collection from a photojournalist that has C2PA in it, right? And we didn't expect to see that for a while, right? So now what do we do with that data, right? We're going to maintain that data, but do we augment it then? Like as we, as it goes through our processes, we're not there. So I think there's a lot of policy that's still happening. There's a lot of, the spec is still in development, as I said, tools are coming out, but more and more, especially in, again, in the still image world and in the document world, like the implementation has taken off significantly. So every major camera now, still image camera, has C2PA, is C2PA in it.
I have a question.
Sorry.
Thanks, that was super informative. You and I talked a lot about, and different kind of platforms, data, typically for brain tips, and I know the FADGI also has for, metadata, computer generated brain tips. In many ways, that kind of process seems to answer some of the training needs. You need to say where the item came from and how it's been informed. Some of these about some of the premise events, people don't understand any how to be translation. You do it for them. So the question for you is, how do you think about the relationship, maybe with CCTN, those different projects for answering the problem?
So that's a great question, and I had not made that connection before, so thank you, Owen. And also shout out to our colleague, Charles Morel, who led the project for embedded metadata guidelines for web VTT files, which are caption files. So I think it kind of falls into this project that we're starting with Dave and Jerome about the tiered approach, the tiered community approach, right? So the embedded metadata guidelines for web VTT are super lightweight, right? They're just a couple of fields to say, what is this? And we want to point out toward to other information. And I think something like that, for example, might go on our, tier 1 or tier 2 of our community recommendations. In my mind, as I make stuff up on the spot, tier 1 is a checksum. It's a hash value. It says that this is an unchanged file, and that might be fine for your organization. Level 2 might be we're embedding metadata around the source of this file. Level 4 might be C2PA. Now we just have to collectively think of what's level 3, and we're done with this project. But so we're looking at sort of other, we want people to be able to find a way to meet their content authenticity provenance goals without necessarily having to go full C2PA compliant, but they need to have the information about what they can do with what they have.
Right. So I was sort of thinking C2PA, as a delivery mechanism, as well. I know you're thinking about the target specification as well.
Hmm.
So we like, could you get a target on steroids and put some
Maybe. So, target, is, the answer could be potentially, and I will say one of the, I'm not going to answer your question directly because I have not thought about that. But one of the things that Dave Rice mentioned at a conversation we had last week was, let's try to get C2PA or these content provenance data embedded into the format spec, not just in the C2PA spec. So, he said, well, we'll reach out to Seller and see if we can get it, not necessarily just C2PA, but content authenticity, provenance, metadata. Where might that go in an MKB file? And we'll bake that into the spec. So it takes out a lot of the guesswork. So potentially it could be something similar with FADGI. Don't ask me about FADGI because, okay. So more people than we thought showed up, so we're super grateful. And come and get your FADGI swag, and we're happy to take any questions. Follow us, find us here, send us a note. And if you're, so leave it at that. Thank you.
I would love to have, beer story just putting CPA in.
Okay.
Okay.